Today you're going to practice sewing, and to get started we did some very basic paper sewing the other day. Some of the things that we want you to practice are first some terminology. So the pretty side of your fabric is called the front, and the back side is always the ugly or the faded side. When you sew two items together, you normally sew them face to face or front to front, and then you would sew a straight line. So I want to show you what the straight stitch looks like. A straight stitch, just for our demo today, I'm going to cut these two pieces of scrap fabric. When I sew two pieces of something together and I want it to hold, I want to use a straight stitch, and a normal stitch length is anywhere between 2.5 and 3. So I'm going to choose 2.5, and I have chosen a straight stitch on my machine. There is something called a standard seam allowance, and a standard seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. That is your standard if you're going to sew with any pattern that just says sew these two items together. They are normally talking about using a 5/8 seam allowance. So you're going to want to familiarize yourself with that by looking at the little guidelines on your silver needle plate, and it will show you a 5/8 inch marking. It is just, this needle plate only goes up to 6/8, so I know it's just one marking in from that. And then every time you stitch, you have to do something called knotting. And a lot of people think of a knot as taking two pieces and tying the string together. But when you sew, you want to use the knot technique that is called back stitching. So to get started, I have two threads that are coming up from my machine, and I've placed my presser foot down. So I'm going to hold them so they don't get sucked back into the machine. And I'm just going to take 1 or 2 stitches with the hand wheel. So my threads are now caught. Then I push down the reverse, and I go backwards all the way off the fabric. So I'm completely off the fabric now, and now I come back on the fabric going straight. And that little process of back stitching and then forward stitching will lock in your stitches, and there is no need to actually tie a knot. So I continue on sewing at my 5/8 seam allowance. I use one hand to guide. It's kind of like steering a boat. I'm not pushing. There's no need to push. The feed dogs underneath are moving the fabric for me, like the water would be moving a boat, and I just have to steer using my fabric, or sometimes I like to put my hand here so I can feel that nothing is caught underneath. When I get to the end, I also want a back stitch, so I slow down, I come all the way to the edge, I push reverse, go back a little bit more, and then come all the way off. And that looks like you can see, because the thread is double thick there, that I've back stitched. So I'll be able to tell on your projects if you've back stitched or not. So that right there will hold these two pieces of fabric together, and as I give a little tug, I shouldn't see the black thread showing through. Something that we're going to want to do to prevent fraying is called zigzagging. And a zigzag stitch is going to prevent these little pieces here from continuing to stick up and make our product be ugly on the inside. A lot of people might use a serger at home, but that machine is pretty expensive, and every basic sewing machine has a zigzag stitch, so you can use the zigzag stitch as the same purpose as serging. You take the two pieces that have now been connected, and you line it up down the middle of the presser foot. A lot of people call this the skis, since it looks like a pair of skis, and you want to select a zigzag stitch. Anyone will do, and any length is fine. It's going to take a stitch to the left, which will be on the fabric, and then a stitch to the right, which will be just either slightly on the fabric or almost off of the fabric. And what that will do is it will continue all the way down the edge, and once I trim these frays when I'm done, it will not continue to fray. I will always take a first couple stitches with the hand wheel, and of course I still want to lock in that stitch by back stitching. So down the center of the ski this time, instead of using my guide over here. you can see, once I cut my threads loose, that I have a nice zigzagged edge. If I trim these little snags away, they won't come back. And no matter how many times I wash it or dry it, the snags won't come back and it'll always look nice and neat. Now if I accidentally cut too close and I cut the zigzag stitch, then I'm going to zigzag again. And on your project, we're going to end up zigzagging 3 or 4 times just to make sure, because that type of fabric tends to fray a lot. Now you go try.